Hello everyone. Before we begin today's story, I have a small favor to ask. Please hit subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss our channel's new videos. It's quick, free, and the best way to support us in bringing you more dramatic stories. Your support means the world to us. Where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. Thank you very much. Now, let's dive into today's story. Julian Parker, a billionaire with everything he could ever want, wealth, power, and influence, felt completely alone. His penthouse was always pristine, the kind of place where everything seemed perfect on the outside but was empty on the inside. Every morning, he would wake up, grab a cup of coffee, and stare out at the sprawling city below, but it didn't feel like home. It was just a place to sleep, a space where he could hide from the reality of his life. Empty and lacking any real connections. He had everything, but no one to share it with. His business empire was thriving, but it was built on the cold, calculated decisions he had made to get to the top. Yet, every night, when the business deals were done, Julian was left with his own thoughts, wondering if all the money, all the success, was truly worth the loneliness he felt. Despite his vast wealth, Julian's social life was anything but fulfilling. He attended high-profile events, shaking hands with other influential people, smiling for the cameras, but it was all for show. He never felt like he truly belonged in any of these circles. He often found himself wondering if anyone ever saw him for who he really was. A man just trying to make sense of a life built on business transactions rather than meaningful human connection. But tonight was different. He was attending yet another gala, one that his business partner had insisted he attend, but Julian couldn't shake the feeling of unease. As he entered the grand ballroom, the clinking of glasses and hum of conversation filled the air. People moved in perfect harmony, laughing, chatting, dancing, and living their best lives. Julian, however, was already scanning the room for an exit. He couldn't even remember why he agreed to attend this event. Maybe it was because he had been told it was good for business, or maybe he hoped, deep down, that there was something more to life than the endless cycle of meetings and deals. But then, his eyes landed on her. Ellen, his family's housekeeper, who had somehow ended up at the event after being invited by a mutual acquaintance. She was standing by the drinks table, looking completely out of place. Julian wasn't sure if it was her presence or the way she held herself, but something about her caught his attention. She didn't belong in this room, and yet, she didn't seem bothered by it. Unlike the polished, perfectly dressed women and men surrounding him, Ellen was dressed simply, her expression calm but observant. She had this quiet grace about her, a subtle confidence that Julian couldn't quite place. Curiosity got the best of him. He walked over, a bit unsure of what he would even say. "You look a little out of place," Julian said with a half-smile, trying to break the ice. Ellen's eyes flickered up at him, surprised but not intimidated. She laughed softly. "I'm just here to make sure nothing goes wrong. I didn't expect the chaos that is this event, but it's interesting to see how the other half lives." Julian chuckled, a little taken aback by her directness. "I can't say I'm too fond of these events myself," he confessed. "But sometimes, you have to play the game, right?" Ellen nodded, her smile genuine. "I suppose so. But I think you're different from most of the people here. You don't seem like you're enjoying yourself." He paused, realizing she was right. For the first time in a long while, someone had seen through the facade. "I don't know what I'm doing here," he admitted. "I've built this life, but sometimes I wonder if it's all worth it. What good is all this success if you can't even find real joy in it?" Ellen didn't respond right away. Instead, she looked at him with a quiet understanding, her expression thoughtful. "Sometimes," she said after a moment, "it's the simplest things that bring the most happiness. Maybe you need to let go a little." Her words lingered in the air, and Julian felt an unfamiliar warmth spread through him. It was something he hadn't felt in years, a genuine connection. They stood there in silence for a few moments before he offered her a half-smile. "I think you're right," he said softly. For the first time that night, he felt like he might actually belong somewhere. Not in this ballroom, not with all these people, but maybe with someone who could see through all the money and power to the real him. And just like that, in the middle of the chaos and the superficiality of the gala, Julian felt a flicker of hope. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the world he had built. He didn't know it yet, but his life was about to change, all because of a simple conversation with someone who saw him for who he truly was. Now, let's see where this unexpected connection will take them. The next few days passed in a blur for Julian. The gala had been the first time in months, maybe even years, that he felt truly seen, truly heard. Ellen's presence had affected him more than he cared to admit. He couldn't stop thinking about their conversation, the way she didn't try to impress him or fawn over his wealth. She had been refreshingly honest, grounded in a way that made him feel at ease, as if he could be himself without any masks or pretenses. He found himself looking forward to his next encounter with her. It wasn't about the superficial charm of social gatherings or the polished conversations he had with his business partners. It was the simplicity of the real connection he felt with Ellen. One afternoon, Julian found himself walking through the halls of his family's estate, aimlessly thinking. His mind kept drifting back to Ellen, to the way her eyes had softened when they spoke. The estate, despite being filled with luxury and extravagance, suddenly felt empty. It was as if all the money in the world couldn't replace the one thing he had been craving: authentic human connection. He walked into the grand living room, his footsteps echoing in the vast space. The large windows let in the late afternoon light, casting long shadows on the marble floor. It was beautiful, sure, but it didn't feel like home. Home was where you could be yourself, where you didn't have to worry about impressing anyone or maintaining a certain image. As he stood by the window, his phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. He glanced down at the screen. It was a message from Ellen. "I hope you're not too busy today. If you have a moment, I'd like to show you something. Just a small idea I had. I promise it's not work-related." A small smile tugged at the corner of his lips. Something about her messages always felt so genuine. He quickly typed back, "I'm free this afternoon. What did you have in mind?" A few hours later, Julian arrived at her apartment, a modest place compared to his mansion. The building was old, the kind of place that had character but also showed signs of wear. When Ellen opened the door, she greeted him with a warm smile, her eyes bright with excitement. "Come in," she said, stepping aside to let him in. "I've been working on something, and I thought you might appreciate it." He followed her into a cozy living room, where the walls were lined with shelves full of books and artwork. The room felt alive, filled with personality. Ellen motioned to a small corner of the room, where a canvas was propped up on an easel. "I've been painting," she explained, almost shyly. "It's something I've always wanted to do, but I never really had the time. Now, I'm starting to make more of it." Julian walked over to the painting, his curiosity piqued. It was a simple piece, abstract in nature, but there was something captivating about it. The colors were soft, yet vibrant, and the strokes were confident. It was clear that this wasn't just a hobby for Ellen. It was a passion, something that had been waiting for its time to come alive. "It's beautiful," Julian said, his voice sincere. "You have a real talent." Ellen blushed, clearly pleased by the compliment. "Thank you. I wasn't sure if it was good enough, but it's something I needed to do. To express myself, you know." He nodded, impressed by the honesty in her voice. "I get it," he said quietly. "Sometimes we forget how important it is to create. It's easy to get caught up in everything else: business, meetings, the pressure to succeed. But something like this, it's real. It's authentic." Ellen smiled softly, her eyes meeting his. "Exactly. That's why I wanted to show it to you. You're always so focused on your business, but there's more to life than that. I just wanted to remind you of that." The words hit him harder than he expected. He'd always been so focused on work, on building his empire, that he had forgotten what it was like to just be. He had neglected the simple joys of life, the things that truly brought meaning. And yet, here was Ellen, reminding him of those things without even trying. "I don't know why," Julian said, his voice low, "but I feel like I've known you forever. Like you've been a part of my life in a way that no one else has been." Ellen's expression softened, and for a moment, they both stood there in silence, the weight of their unspoken connection hanging in the air. Julian didn't want to admit it, but he was starting to feel something for her, something more than just gratitude. It was like a door had opened inside him, and he was afraid of what he might find if he walked through it. But there was a warmth in his chest, a feeling that had been missing for so long, and it made him want to explore it further. "You've changed things for me, Ellen," he said quietly. "I don't know what it is, but I feel like you're the first person to truly see me." She smiled, but there was a hint of sadness in her eyes. Sometimes it takes someone from the outside to help you see what's been there all along, she said softly. And just like that, Julian felt something stir inside him, a feeling he hadn't experienced in years. Hope. For the first time in a long while, he felt like he was on the edge of something real. Something that wasn't about money, status, or power, but about connection and love. And as he stood there with Ellen, in her small apartment filled with art and warmth, he realized that he didn't want to walk away from it. Maybe, just maybe, there was more to life than the empire he had built. The days following that afternoon spent in Ellen's apartment felt different to Julian. For the first time in years, he wasn't consumed by the constant pressure of meetings, contracts, and the ruthless nature of business. Instead, his thoughts drifted to her words, to her painting, and to the warmth he felt in her presence. The connection between them was undeniable, and for once, Julian allowed himself to consider the possibility that there was more to life than just business and success. But as much as he wanted to dive into this new chapter, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was holding him back. He had built his entire life on being in control, and letting go of that control felt terrifying. He wasn't sure if he was ready to change everything, to let go of his image as the perfect billionaire CEO. Yet, at the same time, he couldn't ignore how alive he felt when he was with Ellen. It wasn't long before Julian found himself reaching out to Ellen again. This time, he invited her to dinner at one of his favorite restaurants, a quiet, intimate place where they could talk without the noise of the city. He was nervous, more than he cared to admit, but he was determined to see where this connection could go. When she arrived, Julian couldn't help but notice how effortlessly beautiful she looked. Ellen was dressed simply, a contrast to the glamorous women he usually encountered, but there was something about her that made her stand out. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She was just herself, and that was something Julian couldn't help but admire. "Thank you for inviting me," she said as she sat across from him, her eyes warm but guarded, as if she was unsure of what to expect. Julian smiled, his nerves easing a little. "It's my pleasure. I thought we could talk, maybe catch up." The conversation flowed easily between them. They discussed everything from the latest books they were reading to their thoughts on life. But as the evening wore on, Julian couldn't ignore the growing pull he felt toward her. Ellen had a way of making him feel like he mattered, like he wasn't just a businessman but a person worth knowing. "You know," Ellen said after a quiet moment, "I've been thinking a lot about our conversation the other day. About how you said I made you feel like you're being seen for the first time." She paused, her eyes studying him. "I think you're someone who's spent so much time building up walls around yourself that it's hard to let anyone in. But I'm here, Julian. I'm not going anywhere. I want to get to know the real you." Her words hit him harder than he expected. He had spent so long hiding behind his wealth, behind his status, that he didn't even know what it felt like to be vulnerable. But with Ellen, it felt different. She wasn't asking for anything from him, except honesty. And for the first time in years, Julian felt the weight of his own armor beginning to crack. "It's not that I don't want to be seen," Julian confessed, his voice low. "I'm just not sure how to let someone in. I've spent so much of my life pretending to be someone I'm not, and now, I don't know where to start." Ellen reached across the table, her hand gently resting on his. "You don't have to start anywhere. You just have to be yourself. No more pretending. No more walls." Her touch was gentle, yet there was strength in it. Julian looked down at her hand on his, feeling a warmth spread through him that he hadn't felt in years. It was as if the world had momentarily paused, and all that mattered was this moment, this connection. "I don't know what to say," Julian admitted, his heart racing. "I've never felt like this before. But it scares me, Ellen. What if this is just a mistake?" Ellen smiled softly, her eyes never leaving his. "The only mistake is not giving yourself the chance to find out. We don't know what the future holds, but I do know this. We can't let fear stop us from taking a chance on something real." Julian felt his walls slowly crumbling. For the first time, he wasn't worried about the consequences, the optics, or how people would perceive him. He was just present. And for the first time in a long while, he felt something inside him stir, a desire for a future that wasn't dictated by his wealth or success, but by something deeper, more meaningful. After dinner, they walked outside together, the cool night air filling their lungs. Julian stopped for a moment, turning to Ellen. "I don't know where this is going, but I want to see it through. I want to be honest with you about everything." Ellen smiled, her hand brushing against his. I think that's a good place to start. As they walked down the quiet street, Julian realized that for the first time, he wasn't afraid of what was ahead. He didn't know what the future held, but he was ready to face it, with Ellen by his side. Weeks passed since that evening, and Julian could feel the change in himself. It wasn't just about the conversations with Ellen or the way she made him feel. Something deeper had shifted. He had started letting go of his need to control everything. The walls he had built around himself were slowly crumbling, and he was learning to live in the present, to truly feel life again. Ellen had opened his eyes to a side of himself he had long forgotten. The man who wasn't defined by money or power, but by his capacity for connection and love. It wasn't easy. Julian was still the billionaire CEO everyone expected him to be. Charming, powerful, and guarded, but there was a subtle shift. When he was with Ellen, he was more himself, more vulnerable. He didn't feel the need to pretend around her. He found himself sharing things with her he had never shared with anyone. His fears, his hopes, and even the pain he'd carried for so long. One evening, after a quiet dinner at Ellen's apartment, they sat together on the couch, the soft glow of the lamp casting shadows on the walls. Julian couldn't help but notice how comfortable he felt here, in this small, cozy space, so different from the cold, empty mansion he called home. Ellen's apartment was simple, but it was real. It felt like a place where people truly lived, where love and warmth existed in every corner. Ellen, sensing the shift in Julian, turned to him, her voice soft but direct. "You've been holding back, Julian. I can tell. I know you've got walls around your heart, and you're afraid to let anyone in. But you can't keep living like this, constantly running from the truth. You have to face what you really want." He looked at her, the words hitting him harder than he expected. For so long, he had buried his emotions under the weight of his success. He had convinced himself that love, family, and vulnerability were luxuries he couldn't afford. But now, with Ellen, everything felt different. He realized she was right. He had to face what he wanted, and that scared him more than anything. "I don't know what I'm doing," Julian confessed, his voice strained. "I've spent my entire life building this empire, and now I'm not sure what any of it means. I thought I wanted power, control, success. But when I'm with you, I realize there's something more, something I've been missing." Ellen smiled gently, her hand resting on his. "You don't have to have everything figured out, Julian. Life isn't about being perfect or having all the answers. It's about living, really living. And you've been holding yourself back from that for far too long." Her words were like a balm to his soul, soothing the fears that had kept him in check for so long. Julian closed his eyes for a moment, letting the warmth of her words sink in. He had spent years fighting to control every aspect of his life, but with Ellen, he was starting to understand that some things couldn't be controlled. Some things had to be felt. As the weeks went by, Julian began to change. He found himself stepping away from the constant hustle of work, taking more time to enjoy the simple things. He spent more time with Ellen, exploring the city, going to art galleries, and taking long walks through the park. They laughed together, shared stories, and grew closer. Julian found himself thinking less about his empire and more about the life he was building with Ellen. But as their connection deepened, so did Julian's fears. The walls he had worked so hard to tear down were still there, just beneath the surface. He wanted to be open, to let Ellen in completely, but the idea of being vulnerable was still a terrifying thought. What if he wasn't enough? What if he couldn't live up to her expectations? Or worse, what if she left him when she realized the truth about who he was? One evening, as they walked through a quiet street lined with trees, Julian's thoughts swirled in his mind. Ellen noticed his silence and gently squeezed his hand. "What's going on in that head of yours?" she asked, her voice soft and caring. Julian hesitated for a moment before speaking. "I'm scared, Ellen. Scared of losing you. Scared that I'm not enough. I've spent my whole life building something. This empire, but it feels so empty. And I don't know how to be the man I want to be for you. Not when I feel like I'm still so lost inside." Ellen stopped walking, turning to face him. She took both of his hands in hers, looking him straight in the eyes. "Julian, you don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have everything figured out. What I care about is who you are when you're with me. The real you. The man who can laugh, who can feel, who can love." Her words settled over him like a wave of relief. Julian felt the tension in his chest loosen, And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that maybe, just maybe, he could let go of his fears. Maybe he could have everything he ever wanted, not just the wealth or the power, but the love, the connection, and the life that had always been just out of reach. And in that moment, standing there on the quiet street with Ellen, Julian knew that he was ready to take the next step. It wouldn't be easy, and there would be challenges ahead, but he wasn't afraid anymore. With Ellen by his side, he could face whatever came his way. As the weeks went by, Julian began to let go of the weight he had carried for so long. He and Ellen grew even closer, their bond deepening with each passing day. He no longer felt like he was pretending, trying to maintain an image of perfection. When he was with Ellen, he could be himself, vulnerable, real, and free from the pressure of constantly measuring up. For the first time, he realized that he wasn't alone in the world. He had someone by his side who accepted him for who he truly was, and that was a gift he had never imagined he'd receive. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm orange glow over the city, Julian and Ellen sat together on the balcony of his penthouse. The city sprawled beneath them, but here, in this quiet moment, the world seemed far away. They were in their own little bubble, far removed from the hustle and bustle that usually defined Julian's life. Ellen turned to him, her expression soft yet full of a kind of quiet understanding. "You've changed, Julian," she said quietly. "I see it in the way you look at life now. You're not running anymore. You are living." Julian smiled, a warmth spreading through his chest at her words. "It's because of you, Ellen. You've shown me that there's more to life than the business world I've built. You've helped me remember who I really am, beyond the suits and the boardrooms." Ellen reached for his hand, her fingers intertwining with his. "You've always known who you are, Julian. You just needed someone to remind you. We all get lost sometimes, but it's never too late to find your way back." Julian looked at her, his heart swelling with gratitude. "I don't know what I'd do without you. You've been my anchor through all of this." Ellen's smile was gentle but full of something deeper, something unspoken but understood. "You're not alone anymore, Julian. You never will be." For a moment, they just sat there, the silence between them comfortable, full of meaning. Julian had never felt more at peace in his life. He didn't have to be the perfect businessman, the perfect CEO. With Ellen, he could just be himself, and that was enough. But as much as Julian had embraced the changes within himself, there was still one thing that weighed heavily on his mind. He had kept something from Ellen, something that had been gnawing at him since the day they first met. The truth about who he really was, beyond the surface of his wealth and status. He knew he couldn't keep this secret forever. It wasn't fair to her. She deserved to know the truth, to understand the full picture of who he was, even if it meant risking everything they had built together. "Ellen," Julian began, his voice unsteady, "there's something I need to tell you. Something I should have said a long time ago." Ellen turned to him, her expression calm but attentive. "What is it, Julian?" He took a deep breath, gathering his thoughts. "I've been afraid of losing you, afraid of losing everything. You see, all this time, I've been holding something back from you. My family, my legacy. There's more to it than you know." Ellen's brow furrowed slightly, but she didn't interrupt. She simply waited, her hand still holding his, offering him the comfort and space to speak. Julian continued, his voice growing quieter with each word. "I've spent my whole life trying to live up to expectations, to be this perfect son, this perfect businessman. But it's all been a lie. I've had my hands in things I didn't want to, made choices I wasn't proud of. I've hurt people I care about, all in the name of success." He looked at her, his heart heavy with the weight of his confession. "I wanted to tell you sooner, but I was afraid that you wouldn't look at me the same way, that everything we've built together would fall apart." Ellen remained silent for a long moment, her gaze fixed on him. Julian held his breath, waiting for her reaction, his stomach twisted in knots. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft but steady. "Julian, I don't care about your past. I care about who you are now. I care about how you're choosing to live today. What matters is that you're being honest with me, that you're letting me in. And I'm here. I'm not going anywhere." Her words, simple yet profound, washed over him like a wave of relief. Julian had expected anger, disappointment, or perhaps even rejection. Instead, she was offering him something far more valuable, understanding and acceptance. In that moment, Julian realized that the fear he had been carrying had no place in his life anymore. He didn't need to be perfect. He didn't need to have all the answers. All he needed was to be true to himself. And with Ellen by his side, he knew he could do that. "Thank you," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You've given me a chance to be the person I've always wanted to be. And for that, I'll be forever grateful." Ellen smiled, her eyes shining with warmth. "We're in this together, Julian. Whatever comes next, we face it together." As Julian looked into her eyes, he knew she was right. They had both come so far, and they weren't done yet. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear: he didn't have to face it alone anymore. And with that, for the first time in his life, Julian felt truly free. In the weeks that followed, Julian's life began to change in ways he hadn't expected. Every day felt like a new chapter, one where he was free to explore who he really was without the weight of his past constantly hanging over him. Ellen's presence in his life had shifted something deep inside him, and for the first time in years, he felt truly alive. He wasn't the perfect billionaire CEO anymore, but in a strange way, he was more himself than ever before. Ellen had shown him a world beyond business and power, one filled with simple joys and meaningful connections. He found himself looking forward to the small moments they shared, like quiet dinners at her apartment, long walks through the park, or even just sitting together in silence, enjoying each other's company. It wasn't about the luxury or the status anymore. It was about being together, being real. One evening, Julian found himself sitting in his penthouse, staring out at the city skyline, the lights twinkling like stars in the distance. For the first time, he wasn't thinking about work, about the next big deal, or the pressure of running a multi-billion-dollar empire. He was thinking about Ellen, the way she had touched his life, the way she had helped him find peace in a world that had always been about hustle and ambition. He picked up his phone, his thumb hovering over the screen. He hadn't planned on making any big decisions today, but something about the stillness of the night made him want to take the next step. He sent her a message. "I'm thinking about something. Would you meet me tomorrow?" Ellen's reply came almost immediately. "Of course. What's on your mind?" The next day, they met at the park where they often walked. Julian had something he wanted to say, something important. His heart was pounding as he waited for Ellen to arrive, his mind racing with thoughts of how to explain what he was feeling. When she arrived, Julian could see the concern in her eyes. "What's going on?" she asked gently, sensing his unease. He smiled softly, trying to calm his nerves. "It's nothing bad, I promise. I've just been thinking a lot about where we are, about how much we've been through, how much I've changed since meeting you. And the truth is, I want to be with you. I want to build something real with you, something that's not based on fear or expectations. I want to see where this can go, without holding anything back." Ellen's eyes softened, and for a moment, there was silence between them. Julian held his breath, unsure of what she would say. But then she smiled, a smile that lit up her whole face, and his heart skipped a beat. "Julian," she said, her voice full of warmth, "I've never asked for anything from you. All I've wanted is for you to be true to yourself, to be the person you are when we're together. And I see that now. I see the real you, the man who is willing to let go of his fears and take a chance on something that matters. Yes, I want that too. I want to see where this can go. Together." In that moment, Julian felt a weight lift off his chest. He had feared so many things: failure, rejection, not being enough. But now, standing here with Ellen, he knew he had found something worth fighting for. The fear that had held him back for so long was gone, replaced by the certainty that he wasn't alone anymore. They were in this together. They walked together through the park, hand in hand, as the sun began to set. The golden light bathed everything in a soft, warm glow, and Julian couldn't help but feel a deep sense of peace settle over him. He had spent so many years chasing after the wrong things, but now, with Ellen by his side, he realized that the most important thing wasn't wealth or success. It was love, it was connection, and it was the freedom to be himself. As they reached the end of the park, Julian stopped and turned to face her, his heart full of gratitude. "I don't have all the answers, Ellen," he said quietly, "but I'm ready to take the next step. I want to be with you. I want to build a life with you, something real. I don't know what the future holds, but I know I want you in it." Ellen's eyes sparkled as she nodded, her smile wide and genuine. "I'm with you, Julian. every step of the way. And in that moment, Julian knew he had finally found the one thing that had always eluded him, the thing he never knew he needed, a partner, someone who loved him for who he truly was, and someone with whom he could share a future filled with hope, love, and endless possibilities. With Ellen by his side, Julian felt ready to face whatever the future had in store. No longer bound by the weight of his past, he was free to embrace the life he had always dreamed of, one that was real, one that was full of love. The weeks that followed felt like a dream for Julian. He woke up every morning with a new sense of purpose, something he hadn't experienced in years. The weight of his past, the constant need to prove himself, was slowly lifting. And every time he looked at Ellen, he felt that familiar warmth inside, the kind of warmth he had only dreamed of for so long. They had built something real, something that wasn't about expectations or obligations, but about love and trust. But just as things seemed to be falling into place, Julian's past came knocking on his door, reminding him that not everything could be left behind. It was a cold Thursday morning when Julian received the call. His father's lawyer was on the line, his voice urgent but professional. "Julian, we need to talk. There's something about the estate that requires your immediate attention." Julian's heart sank. He hadn't spoken to his father in years, not since their last heated argument about business decisions and family legacy. His father's influence had always loomed over him, and the weight of his expectations had shaped Julian's entire life. He had worked so hard to distance himself from that life, from the empire his father had built, but now it seemed it was all catching up with him. "I'll be there," Julian replied, his voice steady but with an underlying tension. He hung up the phone and turned to Ellen, who had just walked into the room. "What's wrong?" she asked, noticing the change in his demeanor. Julian paused for a moment, gathering his thoughts before speaking. "It's my father's estate. The lawyer called. There's something I need to handle. It's been years since I've had to deal with any of this. I thought I was done with it all." Ellen walked over to him, her presence calming as always. "You don't have to do this alone, Julian. Whatever it is, we'll face it together." Julian looked at her, gratitude in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered. He didn't deserve her kindness, but here she was, standing by him, offering him the kind of support he had never known from anyone else. The drive to the lawyer's office was quiet, the weight of the past pressing heavily on Julian's chest. He couldn't shake the feeling that this was a turning point in his life, one way or another. He had worked so hard to get away from the man his father had wanted him to be, and now, it seemed like he was being dragged back into the world he had fought so hard to escape. When they arrived at the lawyer's office, Julian was led into a small conference room, the same one he had sat in years ago when his father had made it clear that he was expected to take over the family business. The lawyer, a man in his 50s with graying hair and a serious expression, sat across from him, holding a large envelope. "Julian," the lawyer began, "there are some details about your father's will that you need to be aware of. It's complicated, and it will require your immediate attention." Julian nodded, trying to keep his composure. "What does it say?" he asked. The lawyer slid the envelope across the table, his eyes locking onto Julian's. "Your father left you everything. His business, his assets, his legacy. But there's a catch. He wanted you to take over, to prove that you could handle the pressure, that you could be the man he always wanted you to be." Julian felt his stomach drop. The last thing he wanted was to take over his father's empire, to live a life dictated by someone else's dreams. He had worked so hard to break free from that, to find a life that was truly his own. "I can't do this," Julian muttered, more to himself than to the lawyer. "I don't want it. I've already made my choices. I've already chosen a different path." The lawyer's expression remained unchanged. "I understand, Julian, but the decision is yours. If you refuse, there will be consequences. Your father's business is a force in this world, and without someone to guide it, it could all fall apart." Julian sat back, his mind racing. He didn't want the business, but he also didn't want to be responsible for its collapse. And there, in that moment, he realized something. He couldn't let fear control him anymore. Not when it came to his future, not when it came to his happiness. "I don't have to be my father's version of success," Julian said, his voice firm. "I've already found something better. Someone who loves me for who I am, not what I can build or achieve. And that's enough for me." The lawyer looked at him with a mixture of understanding and respect. "Then it's time to make your own legacy, Julian. One that's true to you." Julian stood up, a weight lifting off his shoulders. As he left the lawyer's office, he felt lighter, freer than he had in years. And when he returned to Ellen, he knew that the decision he had made was the right one. He didn't need to live up to anyone else's expectations. He had found his own path, and with Ellen by his side, he was ready to walk it. The days following Julian's decision were filled with a mix of relief and uncertainty. He had made his choice, and as difficult as it was, he knew it was the right one. The weight of his father's legacy had finally been lifted from his shoulders. No longer was he bound to live out someone else's dreams. Now, he could focus on the life he truly wanted, a life with Ellen. Together, they had built something real, and Julian knew that this was where his future lay, not in the empire he had inherited but in the quiet moments, the laughter, and the love they shared. Julian spent the next few weeks stepping away from the business. He still kept an eye on things, ensuring that the transition would be smooth, but he wasn't involved in the day-to-day operations anymore. Instead, he and Ellen took the time to plan their future together, free from the pressures of the past. They spent weekends traveling to new places, exploring cities, and enjoying each other's company without the looming shadow of obligations. One weekend, they found themselves on a small beach outside the city, the sound of the waves crashing against the shore filling the air. Julian had rented a small beach house, far from the distractions of his usual life. He stood by the water, looking out at the vast ocean, his thoughts calm for the first time in what felt like forever. Ellen joined him, standing silently beside him for a while, both of them soaking in the peace of the moment. "This place is beautiful," Ellen said, her voice soft, breaking the silence. "I can see why you wanted to come here." Julian smiled, turning to face her. "I just needed to get away for a bit, to clear my head. There's so much I've been carrying, but now, I feel like I can finally breathe again." Ellen looked up at him, her expression filled with understanding. "You've come a long way, Julian. I'm proud of you." He paused for a moment, taking in her words. The weight of her approval meant more to him than any business success or financial achievement. For so long, he had sought validation from the wrong places, but now, he realized, it was her love and belief in him that mattered most. "I never thought I could get here," Julian confessed, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent my whole life running away from everything I thought I was supposed to be. But with you, I'm learning to just be myself." Ellen reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "And that's who I love, Julian. The man you are now, not the man you thought you had to be." Julian's heart swelled with emotion as he looked into her eyes. He had never felt this kind of peace before. It wasn't about the grand gestures or the accolades. It was about the small moments, the quiet connection they shared. In her eyes, he saw the future he had always wanted, a future that was built on love, trust, and the freedom to be who he truly was. As the sun began to set, casting a golden hue over the ocean, Julian knew that this was only the beginning of something even more beautiful. The path ahead wouldn't be without its challenges, but he was no longer afraid. With Ellen by his side, he felt ready to face whatever came their way. "Let's build our future together," he said softly, the words coming naturally as he held her hand. Ellen smiled, her eyes filled with love. "I'm with you, Julian. Always." And in that moment, Julian knew that he had everything he needed. He didn't need his father's empire. He didn't need to live up to anyone's expectations. All he needed was Ellen, and the life they would create together, one step at a time. The future was wide open, and for the first time, Julian felt like he was truly free. As the months passed, Julian and Ellen's life together only grew stronger. They continued to build their future, not on the foundation of wealth or legacy, but on love, trust, and mutual respect. Julian had found peace in the life he was now living, and with Ellen by his side, he felt like he had finally found his true purpose. The once intimidating world of business no longer held the same weight over him. He was no longer defined by what he could achieve or how others saw him. He was defined by who he was with Ellen and the life they were creating together. One evening, Julian took Ellen to the same beach where they had first come to find peace, the place where Julian had taken the first steps toward understanding what truly mattered. This time, the beach wasn't just a getaway. It was a symbol of everything they had built. The setting sun painted the sky with hues of pink and orange, reflecting the warmth they had found in each other. "I think this place will always be special to me," Julian said, his voice soft as they walked along the shore, hand in hand. It's where I realized that there's more to life than what I thought. Where I realized that love, connection, and happiness were always within my reach. Ellen smiled, squeezing his hand. And I'm glad I could help you see that, she said gently. But you did the work, Julian. You allowed yourself to be open, to be vulnerable. You chose to let go of the past and embrace what truly mattered. Julian looked at her, his eyes filled with gratitude. I never knew what it meant to live freely until I met you, he said quietly. You've shown me that I don't have to carry the weight of the world alone, that I don't need to be perfect. I just need to be true to myself. Ellen leaned in, placing a soft kiss on his cheek. You've always been perfect to me, Julian. Not because of what you've accomplished or what you've done, but because of who you are. With a sense of peace settling over him, Julian knew she was right. He had spent so much of his life chasing after a version of success that didn't bring him happiness. But now, with Ellen, he realized that the true success was in the love they shared, in the life they had built together. Nothing in his past, no matter how powerful or important, could compare to the quiet joy he felt with her by his side. As they stood there, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Julian made a promise to himself. He would never go back to the way things were before. He would never let the expectations of others, or the fear of failure, dictate his happiness again. With Ellen, he had found the freedom to be himself, and that was all he needed. Let's make a promise, Julian said, turning to face her. That no matter what comes, we'll face it together. That we'll always choose love, and choose each other. Ellen smiled, her eyes sparkling. I promise, she said, her voice filled with certainty. And I'll be right by your side, every step of the way. Julian took her hand in his, feeling a sense of peace he had never known before. The future was still uncertain, but one thing was for sure. They were in this together, and that was all that mattered. As they walked back along the shore, Julian knew that this was the life he had always wanted. A life of love, of honesty, and of freedom. And with Ellen by his side, he was ready to face whatever came next, knowing that, together, they could build a future that was truly their own. In that moment, Julian realized that the only legacy he needed to leave behind was the one he had created with Ellen, a life full of love, connection, and the freedom to be exactly who they were.